He fed his loyal companion first, letting his own hunger go unheard until a patrol car rolled up beside him. James counted the coins in his palm for the third time, though the sum wouldn't change. 73 cents. Not enough for both of them to eat tonight. The November wind cut through his threadbare army jacket as he sat on the concrete ledge outside the corner store, his dog Max pressed against his leg for warmth. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 8 years of service, and here he was, choosing between his own hunger and his only friends. I promised I'd never leave a man behind over there. Won't start now with you, old boy. His fingers closed around the coins. Decision made, as Max looked up at him with cloudy, trusting eyes. The fluorescent lights of the discount store hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across James' weathered face. At 43, he looked 60, his body bent by more than just military service. The cashier barely glanced up when he placed the small can of dog food on the counter, sliding his coins forward with dignity intact. The girl, no more than 19, swept the change into the register without a word. James knew what she saw. Another broken man, another invisible face. He tucked the can into his jacket pocket and nodded a silent thanks she didn't acknowledge. Outside, the temperature had dropped another 5 degrees. James's stomach contracted painfully as he made his way back to the alley where he'd left their meager belongings, a tattered backpack, a folded blanket, his discharge papers sealed in plastic. Max limped slightly behind him, arthritis worsening in the cold. The old German shepherd had been a military dog once too, before age and a shrapnel injury made him unsuitable for service. 2 old soldiers, put out to pasture. James had adopted him when no one else would, never imagining they'd end up sharing the same fate. The narrow alley offered minimal shelter from the wind, but at least the dumpster blocked the worst of it. James unfolded the blanket with careful movements, arranging it in the cleanest corner before opening the small can. The metallic pop echoed between brick walls as Max's tail began a hopeful wag. "Dinner's served, Sergeant," James murmured, his voice rough from disuse as he scraped the contents into a dented bowl, one of their few possessions. Max's collar tags clinked against the metal as he ate, the sound oddly comforting in the gathering darkness. James watched every bite disappear, ignoring the hollow ache in his own stomach. 3 days since his last proper meal, half a sandwich from a church outreach program that hadn't asked too many questions. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford, but some habits died harder than others. He'd stood at the back of the line, waited until others had been served, thanked the volunteers with military precision. "Yes, ma'am," "No, sir," "Much appreciated." Words that belonged to a man who still believed he had a place in the world. Water was easier to come by than food. James unscrewed his plastic bottle and took careful sips, making it last. The public bathroom at the park closed at sundown, which meant no refills until morning. Max finished eating and licked the bowl clean, then looked up expectantly. "That's all for tonight, buddy," James said, running his hand over the dog's graying muzzle. "One of us needs to keep his strength up." The irony wasn't lost on him. Max would be 13 in dog years next month, ancient by military standards, while James had barely reached middle age. Darkness settled over the city like a blanket, bringing with it the peculiar quiet of urban emptiness. Most people were home now, eating dinner, watching television, living normal lives behind walls and windows. James arranged their sleeping spot methodically, the ritual giving structure to a life that had lost all other framework. Backpack as pillow, jacket buttoned to the neck, blanket over both man and dog. Max's warmth pressed against his side was better than any heater. James stared upward at the slice of sky visible between buildings, the stars obscured by city lights and low clouds threatening snow. Sleep came in fits and starts, hunger keeping him at the edges of consciousness. James drifted through memories of desert heat and mess hall meals, of brotherhood forged in danger and the structure that had once defined his days. The transition to civilian life had been harder than anyone warned, the job market unforgiving of gaps in employment history, the nightmares that made regular hours impossible, the paperwork that seemed designed to deny rather than assist. Each setback had pushed him closer to the edge until one day, the edge disappeared beneath his feet entirely. A sudden noise jolted him awake, the distinctive crunch of tires on gravel, the low rumble of an engine idling nearby. James tensed instinctively, one arm tightening around Max, who had already raised his head, ears alert. Blue and red lights pulsed silently against the brick wall at the alley's entrance, casting alternating shadows that stretched and receded like phantom sentries. Move along or move out. The eternal question for those who existed on society's margins. Police meant either forced relocation, or worse, separation from Max, if they decided to enforce ordinances against homeless encampments. The engine cut off, leaving only the lights still cycling. James heard the distinctive sound of a car door opening, the soft squeak of leather duty belt and boots on pavement. He sat up slowly, careful to make no sudden movements, his hand resting reassuringly on Max's neck. The flashlight beams swept into the alley, finding him with unerring accuracy, temporarily blinding him as it illuminated the two figures huddled against the wall. One man, one faithful dog, and not a scrap of food between them. Officer Daniel Morales had seen his share of homelessness in his 8 years on patrol, but something about this particular scene made him pause. The man didn't flinch or cower from the flashlight beam, didn't immediately reach for bottles to hide or grab possessions to run. Instead, he simply raised a weathered hand to shield his eyes, his other arm wrapped protectively around an aging German shepherd. Even in the harsh light, Morales could see the military bearing in the man's posture, the kind his own father had carried to his grave, 20 years after Vietnam. "Evening, sir," Morales called, keeping his tone neutral as he approached. The standard procedure was to check for outstanding warrants, issue a warning about city ordinances, direct the individual to the nearest shelter. But the temperature was dropping below freezing tonight, and the nearest shelter had been at capacity for weeks. The dog complicated matters further. Most facilities wouldn't take animals, and Morales had seen too many homeless individuals choose the street over giving up their only companions. He lowered the flashlight slightly, giving the man back his vision while maintaining enough illumination to assess the situation. James straightened his spine, instinctively, old habits surfacing in the presence of authority. "Evening, officer." His voice emerged steadier than he expected, though his heart raced with familiar dread. Max remained perfectly still beside him, trained never to react aggressively to uniforms. "Please don't separate us." The thought burned through his mind, as he calculated how quickly he could gather their few belongings, how far they might make it before the cold became dangerous. The officer's footsteps stopped several feet away, close enough for conversation, far enough to signal he wasn't making an immediate move. Morales noticed the empty food bowl, the careful arrangement of the few possessions, the military precision in how the small space had been organized. Not the chaotic desperation of addiction, but the methodical survival of someone who had once lived by structure and discipline. "Cold night to be out," he observed, deliberately casual. The man nodded but offered nothing further, one hand absently stroking the dog's ear in what seemed more a comfort to himself than the animal. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the dog's quiet panting. "Military?" Morales asked finally, though he already knew the answer. The man's eyes flickered with surprise before he nodded again. "Afghanistan. 3rd Infantry Division." The words came out clipped, as if reporting to a superior officer. Morales nodded, recognition passing between them. His father had that same economy of speech when discussing his service, facts without elaboration, as if the experience itself defied ordinary language. The officer shifted his weight, decision crystallizing as he observed the man's sunken cheeks and the protruding ribs of the dog, visible even beneath its thick coat. Without another word, Morales returned to his patrol car, feeling the veteran's eyes tracking his movement. He opened the passenger door and reached across the seat, retrieving the paper bag that contained his dinner, a bacon and egg sandwich from the diner where he stopped every night, still warm from the grill. His father's service cap sat on the dashboard where he always kept it, a talisman of sorts on long night shifts. The cap had been in his cruiser since the funeral 3 years ago, a connection to the man who'd inspired his own path into service, if of a different kind. James watched the officer's retreat, with confusion that turned to wariness when the car door opened. "Move along, order coming. Or worse." His fingers instinctively found Max's collar, seeking the comfort of the worn leather against his skin. The dog sensed his tension, pressing closer as if to say, "I'm here. We face it together." The alley suddenly felt exposed and vulnerable, the brick walls offering no exit besides the path, now blocked by the patrol car's pulsing lights. 1,000 scenarios raced through James's mind, none of them ending well for a homeless veteran with nowhere left to go. Morales reappeared at the alley entrance, carrying something in his hands. The beam of his flashlight now tucked under his arm, casting strange shadows as he approached again. James couldn't make out the officer's expression in the uneven light, but his posture seemed different, less official, more hesitant. Max's nose twitched, catching a scent that made his tail thump once against the concrete. Food. The realization hit James the same moment the aroma reached him. Warm bread, bacon, something his stomach recognized before his brain did, causing an involuntary rumble that seemed deafening in the quiet alley. "My dad was 101st Airborne," Morales said, as he stopped a respectful distance away. "Vietnam 2 tours." He extended the paper bag, the logo of the 24-hour diner visible on its side. "I already ate earlier. Hate to see this go to waste." The practiced casualness in his voice didn't quite mask the deliberate kindness of the gesture. James hesitated, the war between hunger and pride visible in the rigid set of his shoulders. Max looked up at his human, then at the officer, nose still working overtime, at the unfamiliar yet tantalizing scent. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. James knew the offer for what it was, not pity, but recognition. One soldier's son to another soldier. His hand moved before his mind fully accepted the decision, reaching out to take the bag with the same dignity with which he'd placed his last coins on the store counter hours earlier. "Thank you, officer." The words contained multitudes. Gratitude for the food, for the respect in how it was offered, for the absence of questions that would require humiliating answers. Morales nodded, then reached back into his pocket and withdrew something else, something that gleamed dully in the reflected light of the patrol car's still flashing beacons. The service cap's insignia caught the blue-red pulses as Morales held it out. "This too, Dad would have wanted another soldier to have it." The officer's voice had roughened slightly, revealing the personal cost of the gesture. The cap was well worn but meticulously maintained, bearing the creases and character of years of proud wear. James stared at it, understanding the magnitude of what was being offered, not just a warm head covering for cold nights, but a fragment of honor, a tangible reminder that he still belonged to the brotherhood of those who had served. The paper bag crinkled in his grip as the patrol car's engine suddenly rumbled back to life in the distance, signaling the moment's imminent end. James's fingers trembled slightly as he accepted the cap, its weight in his hands, both foreign and achingly familiar. He ran his thumb across the insignia, feeling the raised metal warm to his touch. "How long since someone saw me as a soldier first, homeless second?" Max shifted beside him, his nose working overtime at the paper bag, still clutched in James's other hand. For a moment, no one moved. The tableau of officer, veteran, and dog frozen in the alternating light from the patrol car. "Your father," James began, then stopped, unsure how to express the significance of the gesture. Morales nodded, understanding the unfinished sentence. "Passed 3 years ago, cancer." The officer's voice held the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had made peace with loss, if not its absence. He'd talk about the guys he served with more than anything else, said you never really leave that brotherhood. The words hung in the cold air between them, bridging decades and different wars, different paths that had somehow led to this alley on this winter night. Morales stepped back, allowing James space to open the bag without an audience. The sandwich inside was still warm, wrapped in waxed paper that crinkled as James carefully divided it. Years of military discipline surfaced as he portioned it precisely, half for now, half saved for morning. Max watched the proceedings with attentive patience, knowing better than to beg but unable to hide his interest. "He can have a bite," Morales said, noticing the dog's focused gaze. "Looks like he's earned it." Something in the casual acknowledgement of Max's worth loosened a knot in James's chest that had been tight for months. The first bite nearly overwhelmed James' senses. Salt, fat, protein, flavors his body had almost forgotten. He forced himself to eat slowly, methodically, the way he'd learned during long patrols when supplies were uncertain. Max accepted his small portion with gentle teeth, tail sweeping the concrete in dignified appreciation. Morales watched without comment, his presence neither intrusive nor hurried. The simple act of eating transformed the alley from a place of last resort to something almost resembling a shared meal among equals. Vietnam was different, Morales said finally, breaking the companionable silence. Dad said they came home to a country that wanted to forget they existed. He gestured vaguely toward James. Shouldn't be happening again. Not to you guys. It wasn't an apology. One officer couldn't apologize for society's failures, but an acknowledgement that carried its own healing power. James nodded, swallowing the last of his portion before carefully rewrapping the remainder. The hunger in his stomach had dulled from sharp pain to manageable emptiness, enough improvement to allow his mind to engage with something beyond immediate survival. Got deployed 3 weeks after 9/11, James said, the words emerging unexpectedly. Felt like the whole country was behind us then. He didn't elaborate on how that support had seemed to evaporate over the years, how the parades and yellow ribbons had given way to indifference and bureaucratic obstacles. He didn't need to. Morales's expression suggested he understood the unspoken trajectory. The officer leaned against the brick wall, his posture deliberately casual, removing the looming authority figure element from their interaction. James placed his father's cap carefully on his head, the fit surprisingly good. The gesture felt ceremonial somehow, a reclaiming of identity long submerged beneath the label of homeless veteran. Max seemed to notice the change, looking up at his human with renewed attention. "Suits you," Morales observed quietly. "Dad would approve." The simple validation carried weight that professional platitudes never could. James nodded his thanks, words momentarily beyond reach as something long dormant stirred in his chest, not quite hope, but perhaps its prerequisite. The radio, on Morales' shoulder, crackled to life, dispatching him to a disturbance across town. The intrusion of the outside world broke the moment's spell, reminding both men of their respective realities. The officer straightened, duty calling, but hesitated before turning away. "There's a Veterans Outreach Center on Maple Street," he said, withdrawing a card from his pocket and placing it on the concrete ledge. "Guy who runs it served in Afghanistan too. Tell him Danny Morales sent you." He didn't promise solutions or happy endings, just a connection, one thread in what might become a safety net if given the chance. Dawn was breaking as the patrol car finally pulled away, its lights no longer necessary in the growing gray of morning. James sat with Max pressed against his side, the remaining half-sandwich carefully stored for later, the service cap, a comforting weight on his head. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think beyond the immediate hours, not plans exactly, but possibilities. The Veterans Center might have nothing to offer, or it might have everything. The uncertainty was familiar territory to a soldier, but the direction was new. Max whined softly, sensing the shift in his human's energy. James scratched behind the dog's ears, their breath visible in small clouds that mingled in the cold air. "What do you think, Sergeant? Worth checking out?" The German shepherd's cloudy eyes held unwavering trust as he leaned into the touch. James felt the corner of his mouth lift in what might have been the beginning of a smile, small, tentative, but genuine. Together, man and dog watched the sun rise over the city skyline, the cap on James's head catching the first golden light of a day that for once seemed to hold more than just survival.